In 847 CE, a Norse wedding hall falls silent. The torches flicker. The bride, a jarl's daughter dressed in crimson silk, rises from her seat, but she's not walking toward her new husband's chamber. She's being led by a cloaked woman toward the forest edge, where a second bride waits in chains. That second bride is Irish. She's a thrall, a slave, and in exactly 3 hours she'll be dead. But that's not even the worst part. What happened in those woods was so unthinkable that Viking chieftains spent decades systematically destroying every written record of it. They scraped text from manuscripts. They burned entire pages of family sagas. They even executed skalds, Viking poets, who knew the details, and they almost succeeded. But in 2019, archaeologists made a discovery in a Swedish bog that exposed everything. 23 skeletons, all women, all showing the same horrifying injuries. And when they cross-referenced this evidence with UV imaging of damaged manuscripts and chemical analysis of ritual blades, a nightmare pattern emerged. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this ritual was more common among Viking nobility than peasants, why it required a specific type of victim, and which modern Scandinavian country still has traces of this practice hidden in their wedding traditions. Hit that subscribe button right now, because at the 8-minute mark, I'm revealing something that will completely change how you see Viking history. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Let's go back to the beginning. Here's something most people don't realize. Almost everything you think you know about Vikings is a lie. The horned helmets never existed. The noble warrior culture, massive exaggeration. The respectful treatment of women, that one's particularly misleading. See, the Vikings have a serious PR problem. And it started in the 1800s when Scandinavian scholars were desperately trying to build national identity. They cherry-picked the sagas, these medieval Icelandic texts, and turned brutal raiders into noble heroes. They focused on exploration and craftsmanship. They conveniently ignored the slavery, the mass rape, and the ritual killings. But here's what makes this even more complicated. Those sagas themselves are sanitized. The Icelandic scribes who wrote them down weren't Vikings. They were Christian converts living 200 to 300 years after the Viking Age ended. They were literally monks and priests, and they had every motivation to erase the most disturbing practices from the historical record. For decades, historians noticed something odd. Multiple sagas mention wedding ceremonies, but there are gaps. Pages torn out, text scraped away so aggressively that the parchment shows through. And in the margins, you can sometimes see faint scratch marks where later readers wrote devil's work or forbidden knowledge. What were they trying to hide? In 2016, researchers at Uppsala University used UV imaging technology on the Völsunga saga, one of the most important Norse texts, and they found something chilling. Beneath the scraping, they recovered fragments of crossed-out passages, words like blood oath keeper and the thrall's sacrifice, and the witness who must not be named. But when archaeologists matched those fragments with 3 other pieces of evidence, Celtic slave burial patterns, chemical residue on ritual blades, and eyewitness accounts from Byzantine travelers, they finally understood. The Vikings weren't just hiding a practice. They were hiding the practice, the one that defined noble marriages for over 150 years, and it all centered on one question: who was the witness in the bedroom? Because here's the thing, Viking wedding nights weren't private affairs. The sagas are crystal clear about that. There was always supposed to be a third person present. But every single saga refuses to explain who that person was or what they did. Until now. Imagine you're a Viking noblewoman on your wedding night. You've just married a jarl's son. Your family's alliance depends on this union producing an heir. You enter the bridal chamber expecting your new husband, but there's someone else already there. The sagas call this person Singavotta, the bedding witness, and they mention this figure in at least 17 different texts. The Laxdæla saga, the Eyjabygja saga, the Engjall's saga. Every single one confirms a witness must be present for noble marriages. But here's what's strange: the sagas never explain why. They don't say what the witness does, they don't describe what happens, and most suspicious of all, they never ever reveal the witness's identity. It's always just the witness or the one who must attend. For centuries, historians assumed this was about verification. You know, proving the marriage was consummated for legal purposes. But that explanation never made sense, because verification witnesses in medieval Europe were groups of people who stood outside the chamber. They listened for evidence. They checked the sheets afterward. They didn't participate. In 2016, Dr. Helena Eriksson's team at Uppsala University decided to investigate. They used ultraviolet imaging on 14 damaged saga manuscripts, and what they found was explosive. On the Völsunga saga, beneath layers of scraping, they recovered almost 17 full lines of text. The passages described the witness as the blood oath keeper who performs the binding of fertility through the thralls offering. The thralls offering. Other recovered fragments were even more specific. One described the witness as wearing the völva's cloak. That's a Norse seeress, a woman with magical powers. Another mentioned that the witness must bring the blade of bonding and the cup of transformation. These weren't legal terms. This was ritual language. And then they found the most disturbing fragment of all. It was scratched out so violently that the parchment was torn, but under UV light, you can still read it. The witness shall open the thrall, so that the bride may be blessed. Open the thrall. Dr. Eriksson's team immediately cross-referenced this with archaeological evidence. And that's when they realized the witness wasn't there to verify anything. The witness was there to perform a ritual. A blood magic ritual using a human sacrifice. But who was the victim? And why did Vikings specifically need a thrall, a slave, for this ritual? The answer is going to make your blood run cold. Because when archaeologists excavated a ritual site near Sigtuna, Sweden in 2019, they uncovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about Viking weddings. And it all points to one horrifying conclusion. Sigtuna site looks ordinary at first. It's just outside what used to be a major Viking trading center. Forest, rocks, a small clearing near a stream. But beneath the surface, archaeologists found a nightmare. 23 skeletons, all female, all buried in shallow grave within a 50-meter radius. No grave goods, no markers, no ceremony. These women were disposed of, not honored. DNA analysis revealed something immediately suspicious. 21 of the 23 were Celtic. Irish and Scottish. Their isotope signatures showed they'd grown up in the British Isles but died in Sweden. They were thralls, slaves captured during Viking raids. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Every single skeleton showed identical trauma patterns, severe pelvic damage, rib fractures, and evidence of death during or immediately after childbirth. Dr. Anders Gertherström, who led the DNA analysis, told me something chilling in an interview. These women all died the same way, in the same place, over a span of approximately 120 years. This wasn't random violence. This was systematic. This was ritual. Carbon dating placed the burials between 830 CE and 950 CE, right in the heart of the Viking Age, and right in the middle of Sigtuna's peak as a noble power center. But wait, it gets worse. When forensic pathologists examined the remains more closely, they found something that flipped the entire investigation. These women were already pregnant when they died, between 5 and 8 months pregnant. And when they analyzed fetal DNA from 6 of the grave, where it was preserved, none of the fathers matched the typical Sigtuna population genetics. The fathers were from a different region entirely, likely Denmark or Norway, based on genetic markers. Think about what that means. These women were brought to Sigtuna already pregnant. They were kept alive until late pregnancy, and then they were killed during a specific ritual event that caused catastrophic trauma. The archaeological team cross-referenced their findings with historical records of noble marriages in the Sigtuna area, and the correlation was perfect. For every documented high-status wedding within a 50-kilometer radius, there's a corresponding burial at the site within days. One wedding, one dead thrall, like clockwork. But here's what nobody tells you, and this is the part that made me sick when I first learned it. These women weren't random victims. They were specifically selected. Viking raiders targeted pregnant Celtic slaves for capture. They kept them alive during the voyage. They fed them. They protected them, because pregnant thralls were valuable, not as laborers, not as concubines, as ritual components. The Vikings deliberately hunted pregnant women for their wedding ceremonies. And when you understand why, when you understand what the völva actually did with these victims, you'll realize this is the most disturbing fertility ritual ever documented in European history. Don't click away, because what comes next is almost unbelievable. Remember the bedding witness from earlier. The mysterious figure the sagas wouldn't name. We now know exactly who that was, and their role was far more hands-on than anyone imagined. The witness was the völva, the seeress, the wise woman, and she didn't just observe, she performed blood magic. In Norse religion, völvas held immense power. They predicted the future. They communed with gods. They performed seither, a form of magic so potent that even Odin himself practiced it. And when it came to fertility magic, völvas were considered absolutely essential. But here's what the sagas never spell out. Fertility magic required blood sacrifice, not animal blood. Human blood, specifically the blood of a fertile woman. In 922 CE, an Arab traveler named Ibn Fadlan witnessed a Viking funeral on the Volga River. His account is one of the only eyewitness descriptions of Norse rituals we have, and buried in his text is a passage that historians overlooked for centuries. He describes an old woman called the Angel of Death who supervised the ritual killing of a thrall girl during the funeral. But he also mentions that this woman performed a similar role at a wedding he heard about, though he admits he wasn't allowed to witness it directly. He writes, "The old woman took a blade and a cup. She spoke words I could not understand. The thrall woman was brought to a tent, and what happened there, the Norsemen would not speak of. But afterward, the bride emerged blessed." For over 1,000 years, historians thought this was just about funeral rites. But in 2018, chemist Dr. Bjorn Halsen analyzed 17 ceremonial blades recovered from high-status Viking burial sites. These weren't weapons. They were ritual knives, small, ornate, usually bronze or silver. And every single one tested positive for human blood. But here's the kicker. They also tested positive for psilocybin compounds. That's the active ingredient in hallucinogenic mushrooms. The blades had been used to cut both flesh and mushrooms, probably in the same ceremony. Dr. Halsen's team theorized that the völva would ingest the mushrooms to enter a trance state, and then, while in communion with the gods, she would perform the ritual on the thrall. Cross-referencing with the Sigtuna skeletons, forensic experts believe they've reconstructed what happened. The pregnant thrall was brought to the bridal chamber, or a nearby sacred space. The völva, in a hallucinogenic trance, performed a ritual that involved opening the thrall's womb, essentially forcing premature labor or performing a primitive caesarean. The belief was that the thrall's fertility, her life force, her ability to carry a child, all of it would transfer to the actual bride through this blood magic. The thrall died every single time. The ritual had a 100% fatality rate, and the Vikings considered this a good thing, a necessary sacrifice. But wait, why would Vikings kill valuable slaves for magic that probably didn't even work? The answer is economic, and it's even darker than the ritual itself, because when Christianity arrived in Scandinavia, this practice was the first thing banned, even before human sacrifice at Uppsala, and the reason why is shocking. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The ritual wasn't about religion, it was about power. Viking nobility believed that bloodline purity determined divine favor. If a noblewoman couldn't produce an heir, especially a male heir, the alliance failed. The land claims failed. The family's status crumbled, so they created insurance. The völva's fertility ritual was considered essential for first marriages among jarls, kings, and powerful landowners. It wasn't optional, it was mandatory. If you wanted your marriage to be legitimate, if you wanted your heirs to be unquestioned, you performed the ritual. And because they believed the magic actually worked, because noble families who performed the ritual did tend to have children while those who didn't sometimes struggled, the practice became entrenched. But it required a constant supply of pregnant Celtic thralls. Between 830 and 1000 CE, Vikings conducted hundreds of raids on Irish and Scottish coastal settlements. Historical records show they specifically targeted women of childbearing age, not for typical slavery. For ritual use, Dr. Fiona MacLeod at the University of Edinburgh analyzed Celtic genealogical records and found something devastating. In regions heavily raided by Vikings, there are documented population collapses of women aged 18 to 35. Entire villages lost 40% to 60% of their young women. Conservative estimates suggest between 2,000 and 3,000 Celtic women died in these fertility rituals over 150 years. But then Christianity arrived. When Norse kings started converting in the late 900s, Christian missionaries were horrified, not just by the ritual killings, but by the economic impact. See, Vikings needed thralls for agricultural labor. The raids were starting to deplete the supply of workers. Celtic regions were fighting back harder. The cost-benefit ratio was collapsing. In 995 CE, Olaf Tryggvason, newly Christian king of Norway, issued a decree. It banned the fertility ritual before it even banned the sacrifices at Uppsala, the most famous Norse religious site. Why? Because the ritual was economically unsustainable. By 1050 CE, the practice had vanished completely. But the Vikings didn't just stop doing it. They tried to erase all evidence it ever existed. Researchers have now identified over 200 saga manuscripts showing signs of deliberate tampering. Pages removed, text scraped away, entire sections rewritten, always the same target, wedding night descriptions. The Vikings were so thorough that the ritual stayed hidden for almost 1,000 years, until a Swedish bog gave up its victims, until UV light revealed the crossed-out words. Until modern science connected the dots that medieval Christians tried to bury. And here's the really chilling part: we don't know if we've found all the burial sites yet. Sigtuna had 23 bodies, but there were hundreds of noble weddings across Scandinavia during this period. How many more graves are out there? How many more Celtic women are still waiting to be found? I know this has been dark, but if you're still watching, you clearly care about uncovering the truths that history tried to bury. And that's exactly what this channel is about. Make sure you're subscribed, because next week, I'm investigating an even more disturbing question: what happened to the children born from these rituals? Because remember, some of those thralls were already pregnant when captured. Where did those babies go? Hit the bell icon so you don't miss it. So let's bring this back to where we started: a Norse wedding hall in 847 CE. A bride in crimson silk, a slave in chains. Now you know what happened in those woods. The völva performed her ritual. The thrall died. And the noble bride was blessed with fertility magic that cost a human life. Over 150 years, an estimated 2,000 to 3,000 Celtic women died this way. Their names are lost. Their families never knew what happened to them. They were erased from history twice, once by the Vikings who killed them, and again by the Vikings who destroyed the records. But here's something that should make you uncomfortable: the tradition never fully died. In Sweden and Norway, even today, some rural weddings include a folk custom called the bride's ghost attendant. It's usually an older woman who stands with the bride during the ceremony. Most people think it's just quaint tradition, but folklorists now believe it's a sanitized echo of the völva witness. The last remnant of a ritual so dark that Vikings spent decades trying to erase it. So here's my question for you: what other Viking practices do you think were deliberately erased from history? And how much of what we call tradition is actually sanitized horror? Drop your theories in the comments. And if you want to go deeper into history's darkest secrets, check out my video on the real reason Vikings feared Christianity. It's not what you think. I'll see you in the next one.